We mark 2 years since the attack of Hamas and the tragic day of 7th of October. In an interview, you mentioned that the moment you were called, you knew something bad happened, but you still didn't know what. Do you remember of that day, something of that day, and when did you realize that what happened and what were your first thoughts?
Yes, actually we heard the sirens at about 6:30 in the morning, but there were events of sirens and alarms in Israel before. We didn't realize what happened, but after the sirens kept going and we heard the missiles, we opened the TV and then we saw that trucks with terrorists are in cities and in communities in Israel. And then we understood that something is wrong here. And then they said there are dozens of victims that are dead. And then I decided to go to the institute, to the Forensic Institute, and I gathered all the workers of the Forensic Institute at about noon. But we didn't still realize the magnitude of the event. They say, oh, there's about 100, and then it went up to 150, 200, 250. Then we understood that we don't have space for so many people in our Forensic Institute. So we realized that we need to bring the bodies to someplace else. And it took time that we knew how many people are dead and injured at the time.
For the following part, I must issue a disclaimer that the information following has a very strong emotional impact. As you've mentioned earlier, you led the team that managed to identify more than 1,100 people in the first days and all that. And what was the hardest part? It appears to be sometimes an impossible task, and why?
First of all, when we think about dead bodies, we think about a complete whole human being. But a lot of bodies were remains. It was not a whole body. Bodies were totally cremated until nothing was left, just little pieces of calcined bones. And bodies were also decomposed because it was taking a long time until they were found. Bodies were scattered everywhere, and it took time until the bodies were found. So there was still time of decomposition. Many of the bodies were blown to pieces because of explosions. So you collect piece after piece of the bodies, and many of them were actually together in one sack. For example, if we open a sack of bodies and there were 7 people, remains of people, remains of 7 people in the same body bag. Other people, for example, one person was scattered among 10 different body bags. So it took time to collect everything and to understand what happened. We divide multi-casualty events into close event and open event. What is close event? For example, a plane crash. You know who is on the airplane, so it is a closed list of people that you are looking for. An open event, you don't know how many people are there. So you need to rely on reports. People are calling and say, somebody is missing and we are looking after him. You don't know who is there. Now, this is a mega open event because you don't know who is missing. You don't know if he is missing, if you just didn't find his body, or was he kidnapped to Gaza? And if he was kidnapped to Gaza, is he alive or is he dead in Gaza? So there are many mysteries out of it. And why people did not report at first, because they didn't know who is missing. So at first days, we didn't know whom to look for. And afterwards, we didn't know if the person is dead and where is he. So it was a lot of mysteries.
I'm sorry if it may sound a little bit undermining, but is it like solving a puzzle?
Yes, it is sometimes like solving a puzzle, because when you are doing identification of human remains, it's actually based on comparing of data that you take from the dead body and compare it to the data that you take from the person when he was alive. For example, fingerprints you take from a dead body and you compare it to the person while he was alive. So it means that you need to have the data when he was alive, like dentition or fingerprints or DNA or X-rays while he was alive. So you actually need to know who is the person, to go to his dentist, to take his dental records and compare to the dead body. And sometimes you need to match together. I'll give you an example. For example, we didn't know where are the bodies. So what we did, for an instance, what would we do? We follow the birds, because birds are going to dead bodies. So if the birds has tracing marks on them, for example, transmitted that people are following the birds, then we know where the dead bodies are, because they are going to the dead bodies in the fields and so on. And other things, we went to the hospitals and asked from the missing people who have done a biopsy. So we have the DNA of him. Or we asked from the family members to bring the toothbrush. So we have the DNA of the person on the toothbrush, and then we can compare it to the body.
As you mentioned earlier with the methods you use, also in the excerpt of a paper you co-wrote on the challenges of forensic medicine in victim identification in the wake of October 7th, it was mentioned that often visual recognition and extraction of DNA were impossible because of the burned remains that you mentioned earlier. Also, you said that you've utilized various known and novel methods for victim identification. What was different from the other situations that you've encountered so far? You mentioned the biopsies, you've mentioned the DNA, but was there something else that was done first in this situation?
For example, in order to find DNA, it's not a novel method of identification, but to find DNA, how do you go to children? Children has no fingerprint anywhere. They don't go to dentists usually. So how can you identify them? So when a child is born, a blood is taken from him in order to find genetic problems. And it is kept on a piece of paper in a hospital. So we took this piece of paper of children, then we had the DNA of the children, for example. So then this is how we could identify the children. Another thing is we do AI for X-rays. Because if somebody had an X-ray or CT in the hospital sometimes, you can go for thousands of CTs and looking, and it's very, very difficult. But if you use AI, which is still in a trial, but we used it in order to go over thousands of CT that people did in the hospital and find out if some of the body CTs that we did is matching, then this is something new.
So I actually helped in this situation, right?
Yeah, of course, IT helped. I have to say that it helped, but it is still under trial, because we use another method too. It's usually for screening, because it's still very primal.
Do you think that AI can, and in the next years, maybe be more helpful in identifying not only victims, but persons that we never knew nothing about?
First of all, I'm sure that what you are saying is true. We will use AI and we're using it already for facial recognition. The problem with bodies is that the face is changing after death. So sometimes it is very difficult, especially when there is decomposition or burn. But the X-ray or the internal of the organs we can use for identification by AI, and we are working on it very, very hard.
In a situation like this, the role of a forensic pathologist is most probably a crucial one in giving answers to families, but also to authorities. Isn't it gut-wrenching work? How can you cope with all the situations?
The difficulty is not when dealing with the body itself, because then you use your mind and you investigate what happened there. The problem is when you go to the family and then, or reading about these people in the paper, or looking at the TV, watching the TV, and see this person picture and story that he has life, he had life, and he had plans, and he had family, and then this is very, very difficult to see the bereavement of the family, and actually the fracture in their soul that they have. And this is very, very difficult. This is the time when being a forensic pathologist is very, very difficult.
It's the moment when you close the door to the institute and go home?
You have to close the door to your heart sometimes, because otherwise you are really... it's very difficult not to identify with the families. And it's very difficult to go through this phase of mourning and crying with them. And many times I find myself crying when I see their pain. And in those days, we didn't close the door of the institute. We stayed a lot of time. Many of the job was done by social workers, but many of the times I had to go to see the families because they had questions which are medical problems or medical questions. What happened to our loved one? Did he suffer? Could you save him? And many times I didn't have the answer that they wanted to hear, that he didn't suffer. Many times the people did suffer, but I have to tell the truth. Although I want to ease the pain.
After 2 years of war, in your opinion, is there a chance on a peace deal? And is there a chance that this war will end? And what should continue after that?
I'm a government worker, so I'm not allowed to talk about political issues. I just say that as a person, I really hope that there will be peace. I don't know what's going to happen. I cannot see the future. But I hope that these things that we saw at that time will never be seen again. It is horrible. What we have seen there, I don't think that many people could have seen. And the cruelty and viciousness that we saw, it should not repeat. It's not humane, and I really hope that peace will prevail. I don't know what's going to happen. I just can hope.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions and your interest. It's very kind of you.